with the second Mount Vernon budget town meeting with our Mount Vernon District Supervisor Dan Stork and our school board member Mateo Dunne, as well as county staff and staff from our school system. And tonight is a meeting that we are doing with the Mount Vernon Council Civic Association. Before we get started, I want to let everybody know that this meeting is being recorded, and we will be sharing the recording with everybody tomorrow. It'll be posted on our page, and Peyton will be sharing where you can find that information. I ask that everybody please stay muted while we're going through the presentation. All questions will be answered after both presentations. Fairfax County staff will present, and then FCPS staff will present. And all questions will be held until then. Also, think about what your questions are, and if you can try to summarize them, that would be great, so we can get to everybody's questions this evening. I also want to mention, obviously, this is an online forum, but we will be prioritizing questions from Mount Vernon District residents first. If we have time at the end to answer other questions from community members outside of the Mount Vernon District, those will be considered. So I ask that everybody please be respectful. The county executive presented the budget to the Board of Supervisors last Tuesday. So we're at the very beginnings of this. And thank you all for being here tonight. And I will turn this over to Supervisor Stork.
Christine, this is Catherine, before you get started, there's something going on with the website where this stuff was sent to the Mount Vernon Council. Mm-hmm. I don't know what it is. I couldn't get on that way. I had to go to my personal account. So I'm reaching out to our guys because I'm looking and the board's not here, most of them. So anyhow, I know a few are, but
I got on just fine.
All right. We're having some issues. So I'm reaching out, folks. Okay.
Okay. If you need help with that, text me. I'm happy to help. All right. Supervisor Stork.
Well, thank you very much, Christine. And Christine Warrens is a Mount Vernon District Supervisor, my chief of staff, and has done a great job for more than 15 years working with all of you to provide excellent service. And like all of us, we've been involved with many, many years of budget considerations and budget meetings. And this is the second of ours this year. We did one about a week ago, and we'll have this one tonight, and there'll be many more that other supervisors are doing virtually or remotely. And then the board itself will have a public engagement where people can come to the board table. They can call in, or they can even send us a video and share their views on the budget. So a lot of different ways. And then other ways, of course, are to contact my office directly, send us emails. I meet with groups regarding the budget as well. So any of those are clearly options, and happy to support that. With me tonight is the school board member, Mateo Dunne, and I want to introduce Mateo, then I'll take it back and have a couple more introductions.
Supervisor Stork, Mateo will be joining us in just a minute. He's not online yet.
Okay, well, I'll finish my part and then introduce Catherine. So just a couple comments. We had this afternoon, in fact, I just got here about a half hour ago from the County Government Center, where the school board and the Board of Supervisors met together for a couple hours to review and discuss the budget and discuss, frankly, the funding and really all the issues and challenges that we have associated with that. In Virginia, the school board is a separate constitutionally identified entity. They get whatever funding they get either from us or the state or from federal sources, and then they in turn will make their own decisions about how to spend those funds. So the Board of Supervisors has a role in terms of how we fund the schools. We don't have a role in terms of how the school board decides to spend those funds. So that division, that separation has always been the case. For those of you who may know, I served on the school board for 12 years and was chair of the school board for 3 terms, and been very involved with schools my whole life. PTA president, West Potomac, and just a variety of different ways I've been engaged with schools and care deeply about schools. But we also have many, many other county services which are essential to our community, whether it's for seniors or for folks who are out of sorts, need some help with food or lodging or other ways. Clearly, police and fire are major parts of that. Housing in this day and age are also key parts of this. And we touch on that a little bit, and the staff here will touch on that a little bit, but we're always happy to point you to the website, which has a lot more information about it. One more point I wanted to make is that the state is traditionally an important source of funding. In fact, around the country, states fund schools at a dramatically higher level than they do in Virginia. In Virginia, we are at the bottom, I think second to last of all the states in terms of the amount of funding that the state spends on schools. Since 2008, the state still isn't funding schools at the level they were in 2008, at least on an inflation-adjusted basis. And then, as a percentage of the budget for the state, they spend 20% less of their budget on schools than they once did. That matters to us in Fairfax County because our schools clearly are expensive. They're a major core part of why we're here and an important part of what we all want out of our community. And our schools are a major source of folks coming into the area because we have high quality schools. And the county in general has funded schools about the same level as we do now for decades. So those are part of the discussion, some of the trade-offs, some of the challenges that all of us will be considering and trying to decipher as we go along and only end up with a budget in mid-May that we'll be approving. With that, I want to introduce Catherine Ward, who's the co-chair of the Mount Vernon Council of Civic Associations and one of the sponsors of the evening. And Catherine, welcome. Please say a few words for us.
Thank you very much. And as always, we absolutely appreciate county staff and your office offering this opportunity to our members and our member association community members as well. So hopefully as we move along here, more will be signing in. As I said earlier, I had a glitch with mine, so I had to go somewhere else to get on, but hopefully we'll add some more people. We do have a lot of questions, I know, from the council about the budget. James Perkins, who is our new budget committee chair, is fabulous. He understands numbers, so I'm sure he'll raise some questions with you all. And thank you very much for doing this.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Catherine, for hosting this I know for at least a decade. I know it's been a long time, and even before that, when I was on the school board, we were always part of the MVCCA budget meeting. So again, thank you. And I understand that Mateo Dunne, our school board member, is on now, and I'm introduced the Mount Vernon District School Board member. He'll say a few words, and then we'll go to the county presentation.
Thank you, Dan. I just wanted to reiterate, much of what Dan said. Our schools are the lifeblood of our community, the foundation of our quality of life, and we have a lot of great folks who work in our schools, who volunteer in our schools, who live here in the county, and everyone should have the chance to earn a living wage and live here if they contribute to the quality of life that the whole community enjoys. We are facing a very volatile economy right now with the reductions in force or other actions at the federal level, and we have yet to see the full scope of that and how that will play out. We'll have to see that in the coming months and years. But we do know that we have been underfunded at the state level for decades. JLARC found that we were being underfunded by $568 million per year, which adds up to billions of dollars per year, every few years, that the state is underfunding, and Fairfax County residents have to make up the difference. At the federal level, the federal government's been underfunding special education for decades. They committed to pay 40% of the additional cost of special education, but right now it's around 9% that they pay. In addition, they don't contribute in other meaningful ways. And so with potential cutbacks at the federal level and the potential impacts on the state economy, the local economy of any reductions in force at the federal level, we'll have to make sure that we are focused on fiscal responsibility, focused on maintaining world-class education for every child, regardless of the school they attend, where they live, et cetera, and making sure that we are maintaining our commitment to the community to be an anchor for both the economy and our quality of life. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mateo, and your comments were right on, and I appreciate particularly bringing in our federal folks who are really experiencing some tough times, and we're hoping that it'll work out okay for them. But we know that even with the earlier presentations we had today, we know that so much of that is still in doubt. So, and I just saw a heat map that shows the number of federal employees, and far and away, the Richmond Highway Corridor has the most numbers of federal employees that are affected so far in one way or another. In other words, they're federal employees. They may or may not be affected. And we know it isn't just folks who make $100,000 or $200,000 a year. It's really throughout the community here. We have lots of folks who are at different income levels, and that income is critical to their support of their families in their life. So thank you very much for mentioning that. With that, let me move on and introduce our two presenters tonight. First and foremost, I want to introduce Joe LaHate, and Joe will be starting us off along with Katie Hortzman. So Joe, are you going to start us first, or Katie? Okay. All right, Joe, yep. Take her away.
Supervisor, I'm good to go. If you all can see this, someone just give me a thumbs up and we'll run the offense here. Cool. All right. Phil Hagan, our director, on as well too, and Jay Doshi from our tax administration. Quickly, we've got some abbreviated slides from the county executive's presentation last Tuesday. Our goal is to try to go through these as efficiently and quickly as possible, and want to leave time at the end. But I think the first slide really is what we view as sort of the executive summary of all things. The backbone in terms of what we see on an annual basis is the real estate tax base, and about 2/3 of that really comes from those revenues. Heavy emphasis this year on the increasing values on the residential homeowner. Stagnant remains on non-residential commercial side. The future in terms of where that goes to be determined. But right now, the big base that's being carried in terms of this budget really is on the backs of the residential homeowner. In terms of that money that we'll show in a couple slides that follow, we've essentially split revenue growth with the schools. Obviously, our largest disbursement transfer out to them for all things that they'll talk about later to fund their operations. What we've also done on the county side, we fund our county compensation program based on agreements that we've got with firefighters and the police. In addition, one of our major pieces and board initiatives is try to find continued funding towards affordable housing. We have put aside an additional $0.25 penny or $8.5 million for that. The punchline that'll probably get the most attention on this, the current tax rate is $1.12.5 in FY25. We have proposed increasing it $1.5 cents more to bring that to a revised rate of $1.14. In addition, we do have a recommendation to increase the TOT tax, otherwise known as the hotel tax, from 4% to 6%. Some of that additional money is utilized to balance the budget and also being held in reserves. Going into this forecast, what we did essentially all throughout the fall, even going back to the summer, we knew we couldn't just rely on increased revenues. Our demands have simply outpaced that. So way back, almost even before Labor Day, we had planning exercises with county departments where we asked them for reductions, totaling up to 10% options from each of them that have general fund reliance. The net result was a $60 million total figure that we took from all of them that included a combination of changes in service delivery, positions, ultimately totaling about 208 position eliminations. And again, this is building off some of the reductions we made last year and the year before, all in over the course of a 3-year period, just about $100 million. But I think really the key theme here is we put this budget together in terms of the nitty gritty, the details in December and January, long before we were aware of any of the changes that have rolled out from a federal perspective that we see almost changing on a pretty fluid basis daily. Next slide, again, what I told you right now before is, this budget is ultimately balanced and will forecast in the future off revenue growth. In an ideal world, we get high revenue growth. We've seen good years, roughly between 2 and 3% on average. For 2026, we give you kind of a projection there, about 3.2. Add in a tax rate increase, we're at about 4.2% overall. Big spikes, obviously, we saw in some of the prior years with the rebound in the economy post-pandemic and people spending. But we did have some low points, as you can see as well there too. Again, from a high-level perspective, what are the major categories that we drive revenue on an annual basis? Again, the big hitter is always going to be real estate. We've had consistent, positive growth year over year, but again, relied primarily on the backs of the residential homeowner. Again, that theme will carry throughout this presentation. Personal property, otherwise known as vehicles, a little bit of a challenge during the pandemic where those values skyrocketed. They've since leveled out, as you can see, with a little bit of a negative growth here. Sales tax and BPOL, otherwise known as business taxes, local indicators in terms of how things are going within the economy from both people spending and how businesses are doing as well too. Investment interest ties directly to what we can get on our cash balances on a daily basis. Obviously, we went up significantly with changes from the Fed, and we've forecast a little bit of a decrease with the assumption that rates will continue to come down at some point as the Fed continues to meet over the course of the next several months and into 25 and 26. Again, a little more detail here in terms of the real estate tax base. 1 penny change up or down on our budget is equal to about $34 million in FY26. I think, again, the key piece here, if you can follow me here, residential equalization, the year over year change, what we call those arm's length transactions in terms of the value of a residential house, positive growth for all these years. 6.17 we've got right now in 2026. So I think that's where you can see a 1.5 cent increase in the tax rate coupled with that 6.17% growth. That's where you're going to get on average roughly a $700,000 plus valued home of about $638. It's a sensitive piece we're trying to take into consideration as we put the budget together, and even further challenging in terms of where people are going to be regionally, county-wise, with jobs as it ties into the Fed and contractors. To no surprise, as the values have decreased through the year, so has our total base of commercial or office in the county, driven largely by office elevator. Remains to be seen what businesses do, what the federal government does. What are people going to do with leases? This is the challenge we continue to see to try to find opportunities for repurposing those places. Maybe it was an office. Maybe the next couple of years we continue to transition towards moving some of those vacant offices towards apartment buildings. But that continues to evolve. Slide 6, we give you kind of a snapshot, one pager all in. And I think the highlight piece here is if you think of our budget as $5+ billion, we take that increment over the prior year of roughly about $255 million. We split it between the county and the schools. We hold a little bit back, for reserves and some consideration by the board. But at the same time, we give you kind of the breakdown by category where those dollars go. Where do those additional incremental dollars go over the prior years? Again, $118 million from the county side, $125 million for the schools, otherwise known as their operating transfer. Some housing initiatives I spoke to before. Schools do remain our largest, transfer out and total share of the pie, 51.5%. And obviously, we've got our reserves, funds that we have to hold in order to maintain our AAA bond rating, which is hugely widely monitored by the rating agencies in New York City. But again, all in, we've got separate slides that follow that will break down some of the categories here. I won't go into individually each of them in the interest of time, and Katie will take some of this in the second half as well. Slide 7, I'm not going to dwell too much on this. Again, between Alice and Matthew from schools, they'll cover this in terms of what the request is from the county based on the superintendent's budget. School board adopted their budget last week as well, too. Here, next slide again on slide 8, all in county compensation through a combination of county employees and the 2 unions represented by the fire and the police. On average, anywhere between about a 4 and maybe about a 6.5% increase on average for all 3 of those groups. Again, county folks are not unionized, fire and police are. In addition, there's a combination of adjustments for healthcare insurance, coupled with additional funding we need to put in towards our retirement or pension plans. So that kind of covers everything as far as what goes into the $124 million. Lastly, kind of switching from all things from an operating budget, the day-to-day needs, towards a capital perspective. We have debt service payments to make on an annual basis that covers the cost of all financings we've done from the school side, elementary, middle, high school, the whole 9 yards. On the county side, just think of police, fire, libraries, parks, a net increase of about $15 million. Every January, we sell general obligation bonds for those same purposes as we did. As most notably, you can see here, our rate was about 3.6% based on a $400 million sale this past January. And we also give you kind of a forecast for the future years here in terms of the annual Novembers. Odd numbered years, schools are up. Even numbered years, county are up. And we kind of just give you a little bit of a breakdown here in terms of where those dollars will go. At that point, Katie, I'll switch over to you to take the second half here, beginning with housing.
Thanks, Joe. Okay, so I'm just going to walk through how we actually, some of our expenditure requirements. First up, we have affordable housing. Last couple of years, as part of our budget guidance, we have been directed to try to add to the baseline funding to get to 2 pennies for affordable housing. We were able to add a quarter of a penny this year, and that's totals just under $8.5 million. So we currently had an existing penny in the baseline. This new quarter penny gets us to a penny and a quarter, or about $42 million. So in order to meet the 2 penny goal by next year, that would require another $25 million. That will be challenging to meet next year. We are not expecting our revenue picture to look significantly different than it does this year. And we're also not expecting a significant change in some of our funding requirements when you look at compensation and just the critical needs that we funded this year. So getting to that 2 pennies may be challenging for next year. So we had a number of new facilities, just under $5 million. Kingstown Complex is scheduled to open. That is expanding the active adult center there and converting the community library into a regional library, and we're adding a childcare facility at that complex. We also have the Fair Ridge Family Shelter, which is opening. So we needed to add some operating expenses for that. And that is, the county was able to purchase an extended stay America with some of our stimulus dollars. So that will be a family shelter that's opening actually this spring. And then all of our other adjustments total just under $41 million. So we have 4 categories that they all fall into. We have inflation and contract rate adjustments, information technology, county operations, and then some mandates and some grant funding. So the first one are inflationary, and this is really for our personnel-based human services contracts and body-worn cameras, items such as that, and that totaled $16.2 million. We had some pretty significant IT investments that we needed to make. The board started this process as part of carryover last year, so we have $11 million to enhance our IT support. County operations is just over $10 million, and that's really for lease escalations, for some maintenance at newer expanded facilities, some library security. We have some money in there for some food programs, things like that, really core services that the county needs to provide. And then lastly, just under $4 million is for some of our federal and state mandates or loss of grant funding. Most of these actions were approved by the board as part of carryover, and now we just need to add that baseline funding. And so two of the more notable ones there are, we are now required, the Fire and Rescue Department is now required to have their own in-house pharmacy. There was a change in policy at the federal level, and so we now will have our own in-house pharmacy. And then we needed to replace some grant funding for victims of crime. Like Joe mentioned, we did have, we went through a lengthy reduction exercise starting actually probably last year, right when we finished the 25 budget. The county executive directed agency directors to identify 10% of their agency budgets that are general fund supported to come forth with reduction targets. They did that work over the summer and submitted it to us in the fall. And then we had a pretty lengthy process internal, working with the agencies to make sure that what they were putting forward met all of our requirements. You know, we were really looking for efficiencies and cost savings, flexibility when possible. Obviously, last year in 25, we took a number of reductions as well, almost $34 million. Most of those reductions were our flexibility and efficiencies. So this year we weren't expecting it, but we wanted agencies to look for that again. Unfortunately, though, what you'll see is the reductions this year are a lot harder to take. There weren't a lot of efficiencies and cost savings left. So we really, there are programs that are impacted, whether it was a reduction in services or an elimination of services. And along with that, we had 208 positions that are being proposed to be reduced. About half of those positions right now are filled. The county does work really hard to place those incumbents into either another position within their agency or within the county. So we are hopeful and thinking that most of the people impacted will be placed in another position and job function within the county. I should note this is our highest level of reductions that we've taken since 2010. And we have taken actually reductions the last 3 fiscal years. So in 2024, it was about $6 million. Last year, like I said, it was $34 million. And then this year with the 60. So all in, we're looking at $100 million in reductions since 2024. And then our revenue diversification, back in September, we presented to the board on some of our revenue diversification options. We do not have a lot of options. We are a Dunne Dunne rule state, which means unless the General Assembly gives us the authority, we're not allowed to do it. But one of the things that came of that was the food and beverage tax. At this point, that is not included in the advertised budget. The county executive put it forward as an option for the board to discuss and decide how they wanted to move forward. If it does go forward in fiscal year 26, it would not be implemented until January. That revenue that would be generated, obviously, the board could put it towards new investments. They could lower the tax rate. They could restore some of the reductions. So there's a variety of things or options that they could have. They could do a combination of those three. But just to give some perspective, a 3% tax would generate just over $48 million. And that would eliminate the 1.5 cent tax rate increase that the county executive proposed. Or a 4% tax rate would generate just over $65 million. And that actually would allow the board, if they decided to reduce the real estate tax rate by 0.5 cent. So like I said, that right now is not part of this proposal. It's just put forth by the county executive. So the board can have that discussion to see whether they want to move forward with it. The next slide is how to provide input. I won't spend much time on this. Two things to note, though: public hearings. If you do wish to participate, you do need to call and sign up with the clerk's office. And then that fifth bullet on there. Can you go to the next slide, Joe? Did I miss this? Yeah, sorry. Is our budget town halls. And if you are interested in participating in another budget town hall, if you click on that link, that'll take you to a whole website of all of the town halls that all of the supervisors are having. And then our budget timeline. Couple dates to note on here are March 18th is when the board will advertise both the tax rate and if they did want to move forward with the food and beverage. So March 18th is when they will take action on that. It's important to note about the tax rate is whatever rate that they do advertise, they cannot then approve something higher than that tax rate, but they can certainly do something lower. So that's just sort of the max of what they're allowed to approve. Again, public hearings are April 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. If you're interested in participating, please do call and contact the clerk's office. Lots of ways to participate. And then the board does take action on May 13th to formally adopt the budget. So with that, I know Joe and I went very quickly, but wanted to leave lots of time for the school's presentation and then questions that you all may have.
Thank you very much, Katie. Appreciate the promptness and you and Joe's presentation. And I just want to mention a couple of things. We have, first and foremost, we have the county executive, at least was on the call. Brian Hill, I don't know if you're still here. Brian, you want to wave your hand or something? That'd be great. Otherwise, Phil Hagan, who's the director of the management and budget and the budgeting process, is also with us. And then finally, Jay Doshi, who's the department director for the Department of Tax Administration. And they're the ones who ultimately set the assessments for the houses and the other property in Fairfax County, which by law they must do. It must be at market value on an annual basis. So just a couple of comments on each of those folks. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mateo.
Thank you, Dan. I'm pleased to introduce Alice Wigington.
Oh, I'm sorry. Phil, did you want to say something? I apologize. I should have given him an opportunity. I apologize, Mateo.
Oh, no, that's fine. Joe and Katie did a great job going through the budget. I mean, overall, along with the lines of what they said, this every time we look at the budget, it's about balance. I don't know that you'll really hear us ever say that a budget year is easy. This one is certainly, I'm feeling very, very difficult finding that balance between the impact on the homeowner, and then, certainly the needs that we have within schools, and then also, looking again at, as Katie went through, the reductions that we're looking at, and making sure that we're finding things that even though we know that we're going to be impacting some services, impacting either service delivery or just overall a service, trying to make sure that we're finding those things that might be palatable to the community. I know this is the beginning of the process, and so certainly we have meetings like this to make sure that we're getting your feedback and making sure that our board is informed as we go through the process, ultimately looking to find something that hopefully is that right balance come May when they adopt. So thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Mateo, I'm sorry, you're on, sir.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it. So I'd like to introduce Alice Wigington, who's the Executive Director of Budget Services in the CFO Office for FCPS, who is also joined by Matthew Norton, the Assistant Director. And Alice, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Dunne. Good evening, everyone. Similar to the county, this presentation just represents select slides from the proposed budget presentation that was delivered by Dr. Reed in January. Detailed information can be found on our website at our budget documents landing page. You will see that this budget is focusing on competitive compensation. It addresses the changes in our enrollment and student needs and continues the investments in our multi-year initiatives. Our advertised budget totals $4 billion, and that was an increase of $297.1 billion. And to support these investments, FCPS requested $268 million from our County Board of Supervisors. On the next slide, you'll see that our budget prioritizes our investments for employee compensation, which signals a commitment to keeping our salaries competitive in the region and addresses the importance of attracting new talent and retaining experienced employees. Our compensation adjustments total $213 million, and that represents approximately 72% of the overall budget increase, with funding of $240.8 million to meet our commitment towards our collective bargaining. A little more than $5 million is related to our retirement rate changes for FCRS and our ERC plans. And then each year we recognize an adjustment in base savings, which is a savings of $32.6 million. And that accounts for recurring savings due to position turnover. Our savings are realized when our experienced employees retire or leave our system. Our next category is our baseline adjustments, and that represents funding for previously approved adjustments and primarily funds the recurring costs of adjustments for our quarterly reviews. And those included things like our substitute teacher incentive to program, funding to continue providing an additional day of our middle school late buses, as well as providing stipends for our fall and spring season for esports stipends at our high schools. Our next major category is our funding of $20 million, and that's for enrollment adjustments, and that comes in the form of additional staffing that's directed to our schools. That funding primarily supports the increased need for our special education services, and that's offset by a decrease in our projected enrollment. As a percentage of our projected enrollment, about 37% of our students are eligible for free and reduced price meals. About 21% are projected to receive multilingual learner services, and 17.2% are projected to receive special education services. So when you combine our compensation and enrollment, that's nearly 79% of this budget increase. Similar to the county, we also have inflationary increases and cost escalations related to our negotiated contracts. And then funding of $12.9 million to our other funds primarily supports continued enhancements of our summer programs, addresses some major maintenance, and then covers a slight adjustment to our lease payment for debt service. Our identified investments represents expenditures to support our safety and security in our schools, as well as differentiated learning credentials for our teachers. And then our multi-year investments represents initiatives that are being implemented through a phased approach. This category totals about $4 million. I'll highlight a few with funding to support our inclusive preschool expansion to foster the development of our preschool students. We have about $0.7 million to expand our fine and performing arts stipends that started a couple of years ago in support of middle school theater musicals, our high school one-act plays, indoor drum line, and this recognizes the responsibilities that are related to fine and performing arts. And then finally, in this category, I wanted to highlight the third year of a 5-year plan to provide an additional certified athletic trainer at each of our 25 high schools. At the completion of this plan, we'll have 2 certified athletic trainers at each school. The next slide shows our salaries for surrounding school systems as compared to Fairfax. Our compensation philosophy stems from our 2016 market study that aspired to maintain 95 to 105% of our market at the midpoint. And as of the current year, our ranking for Fairfax is that we're at 5th of 8 at the market mid, and we're about 7th of 8 at the market mid and max. On the next slide, after factoring our 7% increase that's included in the collective bargaining agreement, we anticipate that our ranking for our beginning teacher salary on the master's lane will improve from 5th to 2nd in the region. Our next slide is just our projected revenue that's projected to be $4 billion. With most of that, I mentioned earlier, was our requested transfer increase from the county. As Joe mentioned, the recommended transfer was 118 million, and that was about 149 million less than what we had requested. Our next major category is our state revenue. That's projected to increase by about $23.2 million. And that was based on the governor's budget that was released back in December. That included technical updates to our direct aid programs, an increase in English language learner funding, and that was based on some updated student proficiency data, as well as the state share of a 3% compensation supplement. Recently, the General Assembly's Conference Committee agreed on the final set of amendments to the governor's budget. And that included maintaining VPI funding that the governor had reduced in his budget, removing the cap on support positions. It provided a per pupil add-on for special education and included a technical correction for FCPS for an early intervention reading program. There was also a one-time $1,000 bonus for SOQ funded positions to be provided in the current year. And currently, prior to June 1st, this would come with an additional expenditure requirement for FCPS. After that, the governor can sign, amend, or veto the bill. He has until March 24th to take such actions. And then the General Assembly returns for a one-day reconvene session on April 2nd to consider the governor's actions. Our next categories are federal aid, and that's projected to decrease by $1 million, and that's based on our current federal awards for our Perkins and our IDEA grant. We will continue to monitor actions at the federal level to determine if there are any updates to our revenue projections as necessary. And then finally, our other revenue category is an increase of $6.7 million, and that's related to tuition payments for Fairfax City as well as TJ. And then finally, our next slide just highlights kind of the next steps on our budget calendar. As Supervisor Stork mentioned, we had our joint Board of Supervisor and School Board meeting earlier today. After that, our next key date is when our School Board Chair presents the budget to the Board of Supervisors in April. And at this time, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Dunne if he has any more comments.
No, I do not have any more comments at this time, but I look forward to the questions from the community. Thank you.
Okay, we will go ahead and begin the Q&A. And Peyton Smith from our team is also online. We will start with people who've raised their hands, and Peyton and I will alternate between hands raised in the chat and then, move over to the chat. So it looks like our first hand up is Mr. Let me see. Mr. Spiegel, you've got your hand up first. Go ahead. Still muted. Hold on. I can't unmute you. If you go down to the bottom, there's 3 dots. If you click on that, a toolbar should pop up.
Hey, Kristen, why don't you move to Miss Catherine?
Yeah, we're gonna, Jay, while you're figuring that out, Catherine, if you want to go ahead, go first.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do I understand that the food and beverage portion of this presentation is equivalent to the meals tax that we've talked about for years, or is it something else?
Yes, that's correct. It is, and we're trying to use the language that's now in state code, where for counties the state considers it to be a food and beverage tax.
Okay.
It's very, very the same as meals tax that you see in cities, but we're trying to use that right terminology now.
Okay. Well, I'm going to make a pitch now. The Mount Vernon Council has been arguing for this for quite a while because we believe it brings in opportunities for money from visitors to the area, which we are still going to get. So you're not constantly just going after the citizens with our real estate taxes. So I hope the county executive would push this forward, and Dan, we're at it again. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much. Good presentation.
Thank you,
We're
Catherine.
very, very aware of those trade-offs, and I'm looking forward to hearing from folks in Mount Vernon just about that issue. And I know there are many folks who have supported that. I know my predecessor for years talked about it, and there was a lot of support. That would have been more than a decade ago. So it's been on the agenda for quite some time. But this year we clearly have an opportunity to do that if we so choose, because of the state legislature and the authority that it gave the Board of Supervisors to proceed with that if it so chose. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to hop over, Jay, to the chat. We're going to do a chat question next, and then we'll come back to you. So Peyton, if you can relay what's in the chat, please.
Yeah, we have a comment in the chat from D. Correll, commenting that their property assessment for their home went up $53,000, and so the proposed tax hike would be $741. And they're also noting that their pension and their cost of living adjustments don't cover that cost. And they're expressing some concern that adding the 4% food and beverage tax would disproportionately impact them and their family, and wants to understand why, even though they have to make tough choices for their budget, why the county or FCPS is not making those same tough choices.
I would start just that the county executive has put together the budget proposal, and I'll flip it back to Mr. Hagan or Ms. Hortzman, or the county executive's on. He could even, if he wants to, weigh in.
Yeah, so certainly what's on the table right now, as Supervisor Stork has said, is the county executive's advertised budget. And this, as I said earlier, really is trying to find a balance. And I think this process that we have is really trying to figure out, is it the right balance? Certainly the average impact on the homeowner, the average value of a house throughout the county, the real estate tax rate increase would be $638 based on where this proposal is. And so the 741 that you're seeing for your property is certainly slightly above that, within that range of certainly what we're seeing. Really, as we put together this budget, it's balancing that. And as you heard from Joe talking about kind of the revenue picture, a lot of what's happening this year is kind of similar to what we had last year, where those commercial values just continue to be stagnant, slightly negative. We certainly had some growth, new construction helping out there. That's really what we'd like to see in the future. We really like to see growth on the commercial side, so that we see more of the tax burden borne by some of the commercial properties, just not the picture that we have this year. So we're certainly cognizant of the impact that this has on our homeowners. We're certainly trying to balance that against school requirements. Certainly, as you heard when Alice went through the school's budget, there is a funding gap from what we proposed versus what schools' request was and what schools was looking at, especially to fund their collective bargaining agreements. Then similarly, we're seeing pain on county services, as we are proposing just under $60 million, and as Katie said, about $100 million over the past 3 years in cuts. Certainly, I think we're seeing the range as far as what the pain is with those cuts. When the county executive asked for a total of 10% from agencies as options, we went through a pretty extensive process to try to figure out where those fell on that kind of spectrum of pain. There's certainly a number of cuts that I don't think the public is going to have too much concern about. But then, certainly, had we taken all 10%, there's cuts that I know would not be palatable to the community. We certainly tried to pick a point where we were taking a lot of those easier cuts, and then also getting into some of the services, but trying to achieve a significant amount of savings this year. Again, we are going to see some service cuts as a result of this, or some service realignments, things like that. And so, really, I'd say overall, this budget, we are trying to find a balance.
Mr. Dunne or Ms. Wingington, do you want to answer that from the school side?
I defer to Ms. Wigington.
Sure. I certainly recognized the issues with our taxpayers as well. And what we try to do really in this budget, the superintendent did not ask for any new additions, no new programmings. We didn't ask for any other needs from our department heads. This budget included the compensation increases for our collective bargaining. Everything else was really around inflationary related increases. And then just continuing, like I said, those phased approach in those programs that some of them started 4 years ago are about to come to a conclusion. So recognizing that, the superintendent did not ask anyone for any new programming expansions of any program with this budget.
Thank you. Mr. Spiegel, you're up.
Okay, I hope you can hear me now.
We can hear you.
I have a couple of questions for Mr. Dunne. Over a recent 18-month period, FCPS paid $9 million to outside law firms. What are you doing to rein this in? That's question one. Question two, President Trump has stated that localities that promote DEI will lose their federal funding. While the issue is in the courts, the handwriting is on the wall. FCPS's Chief Equity Office has a budget of $6.4 million, including 38 people making over $100,000 a year. The leader is Nardos King, formerly the principal of Mount Vernon High School, who's being paid an astounding $258,000 for her position. If you close that office, you could use the money to hire 90 teachers or give every teacher a $500 bonus. My question is, even if DEI didn't violate Title IX, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and the 14th Amendment, what is there about equality of opportunity that couldn't be enforced by the FCPS attorney and save us all that money? And one other quick thing for Supervisor Stork. You've publicly stated that if you enact a meals tax, it will be used to diversify revenue, not to increase revenue. And I see in the county executive's presentation that an option is there to increase revenue. So I'd like you to publicly reaffirm that you're not going to vote for a meals tax if the result is going to be to increase revenue. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Dunne, you want to take your questions first?
Sure. Excellent question, Mr. Spiegel. So the first question was legal costs. So we are facing increasing litigation expenses, not because FCPS is initiating lawsuits against third parties, but because an increasing number of lawsuits are being brought to FCPS's door. And while some of those involve students and that litigation has always existed, many of them now involve political agendas. And I'm not commenting on any particular agendas, but they're making political points, and I understand the objective, but it does impose additional costs on taxpayers when instead of coming and advocating before the school board or working with school board members to advance meritorious ideas, people engage in litigation as a proxy for policy making. But I have advocated to bring more legal talent in-house. We right now have a lot of rock star attorneys that have been either resigned or laid off from their federal positions. We could bring those folks in-house and reduce expenses to outside law firms. That's something I would advocate because we definitely have enough work to fill in terms of litigation attorneys and other folks. But again, I don't make operational decisions, but that's been my advocacy. In terms of Chief Equity Officer, if you look at the organization structure, which is on the FCPS webpage, that position is not a DEI organization necessarily. There's certainly some of that in there. But that office oversees admissions to Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology, oversees student discipline, oversees the Hearings and Appeals Office, both for employees and for students. So those functions I just mentioned are going to be part of FCPS one way or another, whoever is in charge of it, right? So there's definitely tough decisions that need to be made in this budget environment. And my focus consistently from my campaign on forward has been achieving maximum return on investment for every taxpayer dollar, because we're facing a situation in which people on fixed incomes are having to make tough choices, whether to stay in the county or leave. And so fiscal responsibility has been a consistent theme of all of my conversations and my public advocacy. Thank you.
And Jay, on your question to me, as I've said consistently for a long time, to me, a meals tax, the point of a meals tax would be to diversify our revenue, which means any meals tax revenue that we would generate would be used to reduce the property tax. And that's still my position. We'll see where the board is on that, but the fact that we would have increases in revenue, that's going to happen regardless, because not only of the inflationary environment that we're in, but we also have increasing costs that we have for whether it's teachers in a sense for the schools or police officers and firefighters and other staff members. Those costs are going to mean we need additional revenue that if we cannot offset it with other cuts. You've heard some other cuts that have been made. There may be others that we can make, but those will be, it would be, I can't say that I could support an even budget with no increase, because I think those costs, the costs that we're incurring are higher than that. So, but to go back to the core question, yes, I believe strongly in offsetting. If we bring in a meals tax, finding a way to reduce the property tax as part of that process.
Thanks for those answers. I just wanted to quickly chime in.
Jay, let me just clarify. I said I mean property tax rate. That's an important distinction, and I know you know that difference, but I didn't want to misspeak on that either. So
I just wanted to chime in real quickly and mention that our West Potomac boys basketball team is defeating West Springfield right now, 50-40, with a minute 28 left in the game. So hopefully they'll hold on. Thanks a lot for your answers.
Appreciate your update on that. And appreciate all your work with our football team this past year and the difference that you've made in kids' lives as part of that.
Well, thank you for that. My kicker was first team all region this year, and so we're trying to find a good college for him.
Yeah, good.
Thank you. Peyton, next question from the chat, please.
Yeah, we have a question from Mr. John Linkowski. Do the increases for fire and safety personnel allow for increases in total staff or individual compensation, or both?
So to answer that, the increases that are included in the budget, we have the compensation package included in the budget that was negotiated with the IFF, which is the union that represents fire, as well as the E911 call takers. Those increases are in the staff compensation. We have not included any new positions within fire and safety personnel. So we're not looking to expand at this point in this budget.
And I'll just add to that. So it's an average increase based on the collective bargaining agreement of 5.58% for fire and rescue.
Great, thank you. Mr. Perkins, you are next. You've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. So you spoke earlier about the $60 million offset, agency offset, and the reduction in workforce for 208 positions, which I understand about 45 to 50% of those are vacant already. With this reduction in workforce, what services and projects will be impacted overall?
Yeah, so that's correct. It's 208 positions. It is, we think, a little bit less than half. We're thinking around 80 right now are filled. We're certainly working through with the Department of Human Resources at the direction of the county executive to try to figure out places to rehome those merit employees to continue with the success that we've had in the past whenever we've had a reduction in force, of being able to place those employees within our existing workforce. The services that will be impacted, we do have reductions across every single agency And so I think I'm going to find and place in the chat for you, we have a separate document that goes through and lists reductions by agency. It's a multi-page, I want to say like 30-page document, but it does list every single reduction that's been proposed that, again, those agencies came forward with as part of that initial 10% reduction exercise that we worked through and really vetted with the agencies, as well as with the deputy county executives that are over each area and with the county executive, to really try to call that down to those cuts that we thought were most feasible. So let me find that for you, and I'll place that in chart so you can take a look and see.
Thank you.
Peyton, next question from the chat.
Yeah, we have a question from Pat asking, what does special needs education include? What is a special needs child?
Matthew Norton's on, the Assistant Budget Director, and he'll address that question.
Yeah, so the federal government has a law known as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. I'll post a link in chat to that. And then the state also helps carry through what that act requires of local school divisions. And I'll post some information about that right after I finish speaking. And basically what those acts entail is that services need to be provided for anyone who's found eligible for those services through an individualized education plan. And those services generally amount, as far as our budget is concerned, generally amount to smaller class sizes to provide those kinds of services, and then additional staff in classrooms, such as paraprofessionals, to help with a variety of potential needs. And so you could have students with physical education disabilities who might need lifting or help with toileting or things like that nature. And then you may also have other students with disabilities such as autism who just benefit from a smaller class size or more individualized support. And that's generally a reasonable summary, I hope.
Thank you, Matthew. Aaron Scanlon, you have your hand up. You're next.
Hi, good evening. I'm a homeowner in the Mount Vernon district. I'm a 20-year FCPS teacher. My husband was an FCPS teacher, but he had to move to a neighboring district because we can't afford to live in the county on 2 teacher salaries. I'm also a parent to 2nd grade twins in the South County Pyramid. And this past year, there's a 4th grade class in my children's school that didn't have a teacher. So they've had a long-term sub in that room until February. They just hired someone, and we've been told it's because there are no applicants for the job. So I'm concerned of the future for our schools. I'm concerned that my children are going to go to schools that don't have well-trained teachers, that have long-term subs in classrooms. And my question is, what are we going to do when we don't have teachers in our rooms because we can't pay people enough?
Great. I think Mr. Dunne, do you want to take that question first?
Sure. So thank you for the question. Thank you for your service, both you and your husband's service. I'll say teacher shortages are not new. All 3 of my children attended FCPS from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade, West Potomac Pyramid. And when one of my children was in elementary school, they had a long-term sub, and for the balance of a year, because those situations arise. And the numbers for teacher shortages in terms of unfilled positions was much worse several years ago than it is now. So the superintendent's been doing a good job in a difficult environment. So there are some national, regional, local trends, as you're aware, declining number of adults attending teacher training programs, and a greater need to turn to alternative licensure. I think there's some reforms that are needed at the state. Virginia makes it very hard to become a teacher. You can tell that's true because and the increasing number of people who are coming in via alternative licensure pathways. If you're having most people go an alternative route, or an increasing number go an alternative route, then it means your regulatory regime is not working and maybe not achieving the objective. If Virginia achieved better results because of its licensure, that'd be one thing, but I haven't seen any data to evidence that. But we also need to, as you say, increase teacher salaries. And I think that's the major focus of the FCPS budget that's been proposed by the superintendent. And that's the major objective of the collective bargaining agreement that was negotiated with the new teachers union. And I support the unions having a say, so that educators and staff can have an equal voice in the governance of the system, because it's a shared responsibility. I mean, ultimately, the person who makes the biggest difference in your children's lives is the teacher in the classroom, and then all the support staff, from the principal to cafeteria workers and school bus drivers, who are making your child have a safe, inclusive, welcome environment, feeding them, transporting them, caring for them, educating them. And so we need to do more to increase educator and staff salaries, so we're meeting the needs of our children and providing the necessary support for our staff. And I think what we also need to do is look at potential efficiencies. The county has undertaken potential budget cuts and efficiencies, identifying where in its operations it can achieve better return on investment for taxpayer dollars. I think we also need to do that within FCPS, and that's what I've been advocating and will continue to advocate going forward. Thank you.
Peyton, do we have any other questions in the chat?
We have one comment in the chat from Mr. Jeff Lewis. Thank you for supporting the needs of and recognizing the benefits of our nation's legal, constitutional, and appropriate DEI initiatives. Please maintain them as much as possible.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jupiter, you're up next.
I'm sorry. I thought I put my camera on.
We can't see you, but we can hear you. Go ahead.
There you go. I have one issue on the revenue side and one issue on the cost side. The issue on the revenue side is the county has paid multiples of the commercial assessments on a couple of their acquisitions in the last couple of years. A couple of years ago, they paid over 2 times the assessment for the Mount Vernon Racquet Club. And then this year they paid, again, a multiple of what the assessment was for a commercial building. I think that indicates that we need to take a much more studied look at how we're doing commercial assessments. And I mean, those aren't small numbers. Those are very large numbers that, and I understand that we don't want to alienate our commercial landlords, but these factors are tremendous. The second issue on the budgeting side is I'm a member of CERT, and there's a issue that has come up with the fire and rescue people wanting to eliminate delete that line item of only $30,000. I don't know what the impetus to the fire chief to do that is, but it seems to me a penny wise and pound foolish issue. And the CERT program will if it's not there, the cost of overtime for police and firemen doing the types of things that CERTs volunteer for will certainly override that relatively small savings, I think. And that should be looked at. Again, as a point that was brought up with respect to the legal costs, I think the legal costs in my exercise of oversight of the retirement system has shown that there's a vast savings that we can accrue over what the county attorney does by having more competitive bids on legal services. And that may want to be looked at more thoroughly too.
Related to the commercial assessments, I know we have Jay Doshi with us. Jay, do you want to talk a little bit about that and how that works?
I was here as a spectator, Christine, but I
Okay.
will try. So commercial assessments are generally based on the net operating income, as in the income that a property brings in. Lately, not only have the rents been stable or lower, but also building owners have been experiencing an increase in costs with inflation, etc. But each property stands on its own, and it would be difficult to generalize countywide. But there's an elaborate process that we go through, and we do get a lot of appeals from commercial property owners and are able to successfully defend most of them.
Well, with respect to that, can you explain why then the county paid multiples of what the assessments were for these two last acquisitions?
I think that's a different question altogether, not so much about the assessments. What I would say to you, as you can well imagine, is in any given acquisition scenario, it's going to be the relative strength of the buyer or the seller and the degree of the need, etc. So I couldn't speak to either of the specific purchases. I could focus on the assessment side of the equation.
I don't want to go into details, but when the purchase prices are multiples of what the assessments are, it indicates that there's a fundamental problem with your assessments. But that's my only view, and obviously you're a more expert than me.
Thank you, sir.
Related to the CERT question and the reduction there, not sure if somebody from the budget office can answer that one specifically.
So, certainly as our agencies were looking and putting together their list of potential reduction options, I know that one of the things that a lot of agencies would look at would be the question of, certainly what is mandated versus what is not, what gets to their core services, which is what doesn't. Those were kind of the criteria that were used in order to develop those lists of potential options. Certainly, as I said, we were going through and trying to pick those options that would have ideally lower impacts on services. And that's certainly how we arrived at what is included in the proposal that is before the board at this point.
Thank you, Phil. Peyton, do we have any other questions in the chat?
There is a comment in the chat from Mr. Mark Rogers. To second the comment regarding CERT, keep CERT. It is very important as the volunteers support public safety, assistance during emergencies, etc.
Thank you. All right, Sarah Robles, you're up next.
Hi, my name is Sarah Robles. I am a homeowner in the Mount Vernon district. I'm also a FCPS teacher, and I've been fortunate enough to have grown up in this district and attend FCPS schools. This is my 12th year teaching. I'm looking at a graphic from the earlier joint meeting between the school board and the Board of Supervisors about the budget, comparing pay adjustments for the county, fire and rescue, police, sheriff, teachers, and other FCPS positions. And I am curious to know, the numbers here show what the pay adjustment was for several years going back all the way to fiscal year 2021. But I would be curious to know, and I think it would be interesting for the community to see what the proposed adjustments were for those years compared to what they actually ended up being approved for. For example, last year, I know specifically the school had proposed a 6% increase for market adjustment across the board for FCPS employees. However, we were only able to get a 4% increase. However, comparatively, I'm looking at the fire and rescue had 7.85% market adjustment, and police had 10.69 market adjustment. I don't know what the numbers are for what they had earlier proposed to what that number ended up being. But this year, again, it looks like fire and rescue have 5.58%, or have, that is the proposed amount. I'm sorry, let me correct myself. The proposed amount for fire and rescue is 5.58%. The proposed amount for police is 6.58%, which is extremely close to what the schools are proposing, which is 7% increase. However, the Board of Supervisors, including Mr. Stork, have said that the current Board of Supervisors budget seems to only be covering about, if I recall, 50%, around 50% of what the school is asking for in their budget. So that would mean that we would not be able to get the 7%. And in the last meeting, I recall that it was said, you know, because of collective bargaining, they are trying to make sure police and fire and rescue get what they have collectively bargained for. However, teachers and school staff have collectively bargained for 7%. And it feels like a slap in the face when some groups, their contract that they have collectively bargained for is honored and ours is not. So I would be curious to see what the proposed amounts versus the actual amounts were for those years. If anybody has those numbers to share, that would be wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. So certainly as we look at last year on the county side of that chart, the numbers that you see there are the numbers that were included in the advertised budget that the county executive put out that year. Those numbers, for one, for general merit employees, that represented a change from what was previously a market rate adjustment to then the proposal to move to a flat 2% COLA, along with the performance increases that add up to that 3.83. And so that was part of the proposal. The other increases there were the negotiated amounts in those union contracts with the IFF and SSVBA. I'd note last year, similar to this year, the county went through a reduction exercise and identified $34 million in cuts in order to offset a lot of the other things that were going into the budget that year. Again, if we look at last year, the big thing on both the county and school sides was certainly pay. This year, certainly similar dynamic on the county, looking at $60 million in reductions in order to offset really everything outside of that pay and benefits realm as we look at all the inflationary increases, the situations where you have state funding or grants that are expiring, things like that. All those things that Katie had gone through and mentioned, those are all offset by those $60 million in reductions. So I think when we then turn and we look at schools funding, what we've proposed in this advertised budget is a equal revenue share of the amount of revenue that will be generated through all of those. The increases are included in the budget. The increases in residential values and overall real estate values, the increase in the real estate tax rate. We've proposed a equal proportional share, really, of those revenues, giving 51.5% of those revenues over to Fairfax County Schools. Certainly schools will take that transfer and they'll determine how to allocate that, but that was that cost share. When we look at overall, again, I talked about balance in this budget. For the county to fully fund the transfer request, the $268 million that was requested, it'd be an additional 4.5 cents on the real estate tax rate. And so as we look at overall that burden on the residential homeowner, already we're looking at a $638 increase at the current penny and a half that was proposed. An additional 4.5 cents on that would increase that 638 to nearly $1,000 increase in the average residential tax bill. So certainly that was something that, as we were putting out the advertised budget, was not something that we felt that we could do based on just that overall impact on the homeowner that would come from that. I know one of the things that the both boards, and I know certainly Supervisor Stork has commented on frequently, are the recommendations from JLARC, really looking at and pointing out that Virginia state funding for our schools, and not just Fairfax schools, but all the schools in the state. And I think probably our FCPS counterparts can talk better about this than I can, but we're lagging the neighboring jurisdictions. And so I know a big thing that we need to see is certainly more state funding coming in, the state doing its part to support education.
Can you clarify when you say the average property tax, or not property, real estate tax for the average home, what would be the value of that home that would cost about $1,000 if we had the 4-cent tax rate?
So the average value of a residential property in the county is currently just under $800,000. I think it's like $796,000. And that $1,000 would be the increase on the tax bill from last year to then this proposed, this coming year.
And then, Mr. Dunne, would you be able to speak to it all? So if the Board of Supervisors does not fully fund our school budget, what then happens to the negotiated contract between FCPS staff and FCPS in terms of our pay?
I appreciate the question, and thank you for your service to the community. As a school board member, I am not involved in the negotiations between the superintendent and the teachers unions and other unions. So I just want to note that at the beginning. But it's my understanding that if you go back and you read the press release that accompanied the superintendent and the FEU announcement in the fall regarding their agreement, it didn't take the form of a contract. Instead, it took the form of essentially a tentative agreement subject to the funding that is received by the school. So in the event that the county and the state and the federal government provide less money than is sought by the superintendent, then in that case, the superintendent would have to go back to the bargaining table with the FEU to adjust the terms of that tentative agreement to fit within the parameters of the allocated funding. So the superintendent does not have statutory authority or authority from the school board to negotiate a contract that exceeds the available amount of appropriations from the county, the state, the federal government. So everything ultimately has to be within the budget that we receive, because the school board does not have independent taxing authority. So that's the process that would be followed. And of course, if the superintendent doesn't receive all of that money that she has sought, other priorities outside of salary and benefits might be affected as well. So that would be within the purview of the superintendent, subject to review and approval by a formal vote by the school board.
Thank you.
Thank you. Peyton, you're up.
Yeah, we have a question from Marion Albertson in the chat, and they are asking, what is being done to reduce or eliminate the car property tax?
Certainly the personal property tax, from the county's perspective, the tax rate on personal property has been at $4.57 per $100 assessed value for I think, quite frankly, decades. That rate has not been adjusted. The action to attempt to eliminate the personal property tax has really been at the state level. We certainly saw the action. God, this was, I think, before I was living in Virginia myself. But there was an action by a governor to attempt to eliminate it. They dedicated state revenues in order to do so, realizing this was the state attempting to eliminate a local tax. Essentially, that stopped at one point, and the amount that Fairfax County has been receiving as car tax relief from the state has been frozen at, I think it's $211 million for a couple decades now. And so, certainly from the county's perspective, that money, as it comes in, we apply that as car tax relief. You should see that on your car tax bill. And so, there's thresholds there where that relief kicks in. Since that money has been frozen at the $211 million, meanwhile, we're seeing, certainly car values, increasing just, generally over time as cars become more expensive, certainly as well as we're seeing the volume of cars. The amount that $211 million actually provides in relief to any individual has certainly deteriorated. Right now, it's right around 50% of the value is what it kicks in up to. I think it's the first $20,000 is what it applies to. What we've seen recently has been Governor Youngkin putting forward a proposal to provide really additional reductions to personal property tax. There were some certainly income limits where that would have applied to. I forget all the details in the proposal, but it might have been a income limit of, I think it might have been $50,000 where it applied. That proposal, to my knowledge, did not advance through the General Assembly, and it doesn't appear to be something that's going to happen this year.
Great. Thank you, Phil. Looks like we have one final question from Duran.
Hi, yes. I'm sorry, my camera isn't working. Don't know how to work it with this Teams app. But anyway, I am a teacher within Fairfax County. I am a teacher in the Mount Vernon Pyramid. And I'm very concerned that once again, the FCPS budget will not be fully funded, which has a direct impact on the 7% negotiated raise for school employees. And my concern is that there seems to be a difference in how we treat all public sector employees, where police and fire get their contracts negotiated and funded, but the school system employees are not. About a year ago, I was in contract, sorry, not in contract. We had a meeting with a member of the Board of Supervisors with the Fairfax County Federation of Teachers, and the police were given on average about 11% in their contract that was negotiated in the contract. And one of the Board of Supervisor members said that they went to negotiations first, they had a good negotiator, and that we should consider using them. I found that comment insulting and irresponsible because Board of Supervisors, you are responsible just as the school system is, but you're responsible for funding the school system and all public sector employees. And the idea of not funding the 7% for the first year and 3% for the 2 consecutive following years is going to have a direct impact, negative impact on school system employees. One of Dr. Reed's initiatives is retention and recruitment. Young teachers are leaving, and those of us who have more than 20 years, we're stuck, but our retirements are directly impacted with the lack of pay raises that we've received over the years. And year after year, we go to the state kicks it to the Board of Supervisors, the Board of Supervisors kicks the issue to the school board, and everybody gives us an excuse. At the end of the day, teachers, employees for FCPS need to be respected. We appreciate your services. We need to be treated as respected public servants, employees of this county, just like police and fire. Some of us think that because the school system is a female-dominated profession, we're treated very differently than police and fire. So I know that there are budgetary issues that we're facing due to this current administration, but something has to be done because prior to now, the ball has been kicked down the road for far too long.
Thank you, Mr. Rand, for your comment.
May I comment on that?
Oh, absolutely. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I thank you for your comments and thank you for your service. I fully agree with you, and I appreciate the passion that and dedication to our community and our children. This issue has been kicked down the road for way too long, and you know, at this point, because we have collective bargaining, you know, as a school board member, I don't have as much input into pay and benefits. But you know, what I've advocated for last year and going forward, outside the context of collective bargaining, is to try to encourage the school system through collective bargaining to make sure that we're assessing for each position, you know, what is the market wage for that category? Because the data we have shows that, you know, staff at headquarters are paid at or above market, and teachers in the classroom and support staff in our schools are paid well below market in some cases, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000. And we need to fix that disparity. There shouldn't be some people who are doing very well under the pay scales and some people who are doing very poorly. But again, that's something that I can only advocate for. It has to be ultimately the unions and the superintendent who have to engage in those negotiations. But what we can do is go out and gather that data, right? And gather the data and see how can we make sure that everyone is getting a fair shake and that the teachers and support staff in our schools are getting paid fairly, so they can also live in Fairfax County, because we see too many living in Loudoun or Prince William or elsewhere, and not being able to participate in the high quality of life that we work so hard to establish and maintain over decades. Thank you.
All right, we're going to take one last question in the chat, and then we're going to
just a comment, Christian. Just comment, Mr. Rand's comments, because I mean, I know first off, I appreciate your service, appreciate your being part of Mount Vernon Pyramid and really amazing quality teachers that we have in this area. And I know that I hear that from parents as well. And as a parent, a former school board member, I saw it on a day-to-day basis. So again, my thanks. The situation is a complex one, and it does get passed down. And what I would say at the county level, I think we've stepped up. And I hear you say, you know, not enough. There's more that's being asked, but we've stepped up, and the state has stepped down. I don't know if you heard my comments at the beginning, but the state spends 20% less of their budget on education than they did in 2008, 2009. And as another point, in 2008, 2009, they have yet to get back to funding schools at the same levels they did in 2008 and 2009, at least on an inflation adjustment basis. So there's no doubt that there's real consequences for the state, and those consequences have been stepped up, you know, on the county's side. And I don't know if you heard Mr. Dunne earlier about the federal government, and the federal government has fallen down, frankly, even worse than that. If you look at some of the federal dependents, the funding for that used to be in the neighborhood of thousands of dollars. Now it's less than, I think, $500. I mean, and then obviously special education clearly is woefully underfunded given the commitments that they've made. And it does only come to the local level to how do you kind of square that circle or circle that square, or however you want to do it. And that has been the challenge for all of us. And ultimately that challenge is the school boards. Whether we like it or not, their role is to try to figure out how to do that and to balance that. At the county level, I see my job as trying to make sure that we spend the funds that we have wisely, recognize that we have to be competitive in the region. I know already that our property tax rate is the highest in the area. I know that our housing costs are some of the highest in the area. I know that we can't continue to do what we've been doing and still be the kind of attractive place for families and others to live, work, and play, and hopefully grow old here. So those are the challenges, the balances that we have. And in the end, I know that the school board, as well as the board of supervisors, were looking very hard at every line item that we have. And the board will absolutely be looking at the county executive's budget and identifying what more we think we can do, which is, will help, if you will, make a difference. But the impact for all of us is we have to pay folks in relation to what the market says we need to pay them to keep them. We still have major shortfalls in our police. We're still more than 10% below our police levels. And we know that we still have major challenges there. And we know that's part of the pay and impact that we did there the last couple of years. And I know that there's similar ones on the school side, although I think things are a little bit better than they were a couple of years ago, at least with what Mr. Dunne was saying. So there's plenty of challenge to go around. I got my elbows on the table. I'm working hard with Mr. Dunne and other school board members, as well as my constituents, and frankly, the other folks who need support, whether it's police, firefighters, or folks that just need housing, whether they're unhoused or they don't have enough housing for their family. So it's a tough round right now, and it's potentially going to get worse. And that's the other thing that we all are incredibly cautious about, is the decisions that are being made across the river are absolutely going to impact Fairfax County. And I know that we will have to be cautious and careful, whatever budget we put together, to ensure that we don't get too far ahead of ourselves and create a financial challenge that's even more difficult than the one we have right now. Thank you.
Supervisor Stork and Mr. Dunne, we are at 8:31 for our Q&A and for the budget town meeting. There is one specific question in here, Mr. Dunne, regarding schools. So I'm going to ask Peyton to send that over to you and Nelda. It's from Miss Albertson. And Miss Albertson, if you could put your email in the chat, if you wouldn't mind, and we can get a direct answer to you for that specific question. But would ask you all to go ahead and wrap up our session this evening.
I pretty much said kind of my piece just a few minutes ago. So Mateo, please, happy to give you an opportunity to have the last word.
Well, I would like to just second everything Dan said about the state stepping up. We saw very significant budget reductions in 2008, 2009. We are still seeking to undo certain caps on especially support staff personnel like social workers, school counselors, psychologists, etc., that are needed at this time of a unprecedented mental health crisis among our youth following the trauma of the pandemic and cell phone use, etc. Those problems need to be fixed. And of course, we all know the story of what happened with the Virginia lottery and that money being used to supplement rather than increase state funding for public education. So we need to do a better job, because we have other states like Kentucky, West Virginia having higher spending per student than Virginia. And that's unacceptable. We need to make sure that we are paying our teachers and our staff market living wages, and we need to make sure that our children are receiving a world-class education, because I know that's why my wife and I moved here 20 years ago, and why most families move here and stay here. So with that, thank you very much for your time, and thank you, Supervisor Stork, for organizing this budget town hall, and thank you to the county and FCPS staff for their excellent presentations tonight and hard work throughout the budget season.
My thanks to all of you as well. And thank you, Christine, for hosting us, and Peyton for your part and sharing questions. And if you all have other questions, there's an easy way to get them answered. You can send it to MTVERNON, that's Mount Vernon at fairfaxcounty.gov. We'll be happy to get an answer for you. And Peyton, Mateo, if you want to maybe it's already in the chat. If you want to give your whatever email address you want to use for questions and put it in the chat now. People then have another resource if they have other questions or concerns. And obviously you can call our office anytime as well.
And also thank you to the Mount Vernon Council for co-hosting with us. I know we've got Catherine and James and Bindu on from the MVCCA, and we have a lot of great county leadership that are on here tonight as well, and appreciate all your time. I know you're at the very beginning of your budget process. I think we have the first budget town meetings, and you all have a long way to go. So thank you for all the work that you do.
Yeah.
Good night, everyone.
Night.